Good afternoon and welcome to the Black and Doctoral Network Workshop Series. My name is Joyce D. Williams, and I'm going to be your moderator facilitator for today. Assisting me with the moderating and facilitating is Dr. Monique Burry Ballard, and you're going to be hearing a little bit more about her. I'm going to throw up a slide and do a selfless plug for her for next week. We're going to be hearing from Dr. Derek Smith. Today. He's coming to us with a very interesting topic. So I have a lot of questions for him. That's a population that I work with as well. And so without further ado, I'm going to quickly show three little slides. And then Dr. Smith, it's all yours. Just one second. Let me just share my screen real quick. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to do a very selfish plug here and plug the Black Doctoral Network a conference that will be taking place this coming weekend. However, registration is still open. It's the 12th annual Black Doctoral Network conference that is going to be held on the beautiful campus of Loyola Marymount University, which is in Los Angeles, California. There's going to be an undergraduate conference as well, poster sessions, the undergraduate promoting research opportunities, professionalism, education leadership conference. So I think that that is something that you would want to see. I think there's about 30 of undergraduate students who are going to be participating in that as well. So I think you will want to hear that. Down at the bottom of this screen, you'll see the link for the actual registration for that event. So looking forward to seeing you on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday for that event. The next one, as I said, a plug for Dr. Monique Bury Ballard. She's going to be our speaker on next week, October the 23rd at the same time. There's a different link for this, of course. And so Dr. Ballard is going to be speaking on becoming, how to write your CV. And so I know all of us may be at some point in time we're looking for a job currently or have looked for a job in the past. And I think that this is going to be very exciting for her as well. There's so much that has changed in the resume writing world over the last couple of years, what to include, what not to include, getting generative AI to help you to write your resume and things like that. So I know that you're going to be in for a treat when hearing her. So without further ado, I'm going to stop my screen and introduce you to Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith, I was going to do a bio for you, but I looked through your slides and I see you have your own in there. So I'm just going to abandon that idea and let you get started by stopping my screen and turning it over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just want to say a couple of things before we get started is that if you have a family member or you were impacted by Hurricane Helen or Milton, your family and you are in my prayers because I live here in Georgia, just got back power last week. And when you don't have power and going to searching for food and things of that nature, a lot of things become not just real, but it puts things in perspective about life. But as if any one of your family members or you were impacted by Hurricane Helen or Milton, you all are in my prayers. So you can go on to the next slide. So I always believe in starting with an icebreaker. Is who is on your Mount Rushmore of musical artists or musical groups? And it could be from any genre. It could be a musician, groups. Who is on your Mount Rushmore? You can either come off mute and share, or you can type it in the chat.
Oops.
That's good. Michael Jackson. Ooh, that's Prince, Whitney Houston. Those, those are some good ones.
I would
Another
definitely,
one.
I would definitely say Prince.
Uh, For me, it'd probably be Sounds of Blackness, Earth, Wind, and Fire. And just because I had to learn to listen to this group all through when I was in band, it'd have to be Hall and Oates. And for the hip hop side, if any of you are of the 80s generation, it's Heavy D.
All good. All good.
Anyone else wanted to share before we move forward? Okay, we can go on to the next slide.
Okay.
So a little bit about me in this presentation. I have sort of lived this intersectionality of serving both in K-12 and in higher education. I started off 11 years ago teaching the GED, and most of my students were either 8th through 12th grade or that 19 to 22 of where I learned a lot about their experiences of why they didn't finish school. Kirk Franklin, I'm thinking God's property. Um, then I moved into a private school of where I taught middle and high, but I taught math and a lot of the electives. And my students did not have success in traditional public or private. And we were sort of the new school to help bridge those gaps. And then I went on to get promoted and I oversaw the transition from middle school to high school and basically was charged with designing a program and a pathway for all of these students who did not have success. Then I moved back into higher education as an academic advisor and now as a faculty member in the School of Education. So yeah, I have lived this intersectionality of seeing where some of the gaps, issues are as it relates to college preparation and understanding the student side and even understanding the administrative side. You can go on to the next slide. So this is, just my education. Just finished my doctorate degree in July. That took a lot off my life. Um, it's happy when you finish, but the process is, I think, is if you have gone through it or are going through it, the process is not fun, but the day of completion, that is the biggest burden that is lifted off of you. So that's sort of my education experience. So since we're like a small group, like I said, I believe in interactive. If there's questions you have, please come off mute uh, or type the question in the chat. So you can go on to the next slide.
Okay, and so I would just ask Dr. Ballard as you're monitoring the chat, ma'am, if you see any questions that are applicable to where Dr. Smith is during the presentation, if you would just like raise your hand or something so that he would see that and be able to answer the question right there on the spot, as he said, since we're a small group. Thank you.
So my work over the last 11 years has been really about college readiness. And what I have found over 11 years is that to me, there's the three of the most, and I teach this in my leadership class. There's three awful words that leaders and folks in education use: all, every, or should. And if you've worked in any intersection of higher education or K-12 and you hear, well, so and so should know, well, all should have, well, every should have. But it's what you find is in certain situations in certain schools, that doesn't exist. What you think someone should have, they really don't. So David Conley is sort of the backbone of how most researchers and even people in K-12 and higher education look at college readiness. So it's when you look at this definition of college readiness, and you can come off mute or type it in the chat. What do you think what's missing from this definition?
This is Monique speaking. Greetings,
Okay.
Dr. Smith.
Hello.
I had wanted to take a guess, and
Okay.
yeah, I think that the definition probably can include the student. What type of student, for example?
Yes. And that's oftentimes is the student when you look at college readiness, who the student is in the background of the student is just as important as the process of, being accepted into a college without remediation. What is that student? Who is the student? What high school did they attend? What was the structure of their college prep program? How was the teachers, the support system? There's all of these other things that have to be considered as it relates to college readiness, that we have to consider. So, is there anything else? Like I said, there's no right or wrong answers here. Is what do you think?
So,
What else is missing?
So, Dr. Smith, I think what's missing, and that's only because for the last 5 years, I've been working with the Computer Science Teachers of America, and they want to add artificial intelligence as an exit criteria for high school. So, I've been working with kindergartners through 12th graders to determine what do you think that they need to know from starting at an early age of kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. And one of the things that I've learned, and there was a representative from all 50 states, is that all states are not created equally. And even within states, they're not created equally. And even for teachers amongst themselves, there's a um, uh, I would just call it a lack of knowledge of what goes on outside of either their state or their district, that they have no idea. And I'll just take, for example, like there was one lady who is in Virginia, but she's in very affluent Fairfax County. And so Fairfax County is probably one of the most affluent counties in the state of Virginia. And there was another teacher there that was from Chicago. And so some of the things that she was talking about that their kids are seeing in junior high school, she says in the schools in Chicago, they don't even have that at the high school level. So you can't say that what they should know is if they've never been exposed. They're not writing their own curriculums. And so it was just such a disparity in what was being said. So the teacher who was from Chicago said that they have listed that beautician and barber was considered a STEM field and things like that. So some of the other teachers were just, shocked from around. As I said, it was somebody on there from all 50 states. Most states had multiple people who were being represented. So even amongst the teachers, and these are the teachers who are helping to set up the criteria. Um, and I think a lot of that is based on what they know, what they've experienced, or the state or the county that they are in. Because there was not just not picking on Chicago, but there was other states and cities too that was I for lack of a better word, I guess deficient in what they taught as far as high school was concerned compared to what some other teachers were getting. Because as I said, I work with K through 12. Um, they had them broken down K through 12, kindergarten to second grade, and then 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and then 9 through 12. And I worked a lot with the 3 to 5 and 6 to 8. I don't know those teachers. They're I don't know. I resonated very much so with them. I don't know
Hmm.
why, but it was. I think that they had the attitude of caring more than any of the other ones that I saw. And then something else I'll talk about later in your presentation about what they are expecting, what these teachers are doing, thinking that the internet is teaching your child more so than they are. So I'll talk about that part later.
That is so true. The internet age has changed how students think that Google, Siri, Alexa is that can only go but so far. Um, what is with when you look at college readiness, the other thing to consider is the structure of the school and how kids are entered from middle school to high school. Like 30, goodness, over 30 years ago when I was in high school, they screened you like it was a credit card check before they let you in a college prep program. They were not playing it. They were not letting you in algebra or chemistry if you did not meet certain standards. You could cry, whine, whatever. They was not letting you in. And that's just sort of the way it was. Now, when I got into administration and sort of saw the big picture, and I found out that they were letting everybody in. There was no, okay, so and so is not good in algebra one and has failed pre algebra. 30 years, they were not even letting that kid nowhere near algebra one. But now, this force feeding that everyone should go to college, there's a new way of how to think about things in terms of when I was in administration. Either we could fight about content with the teachers, or as I tell my grad students, we can live in the is that I worked with our teachers to move away from content driven thinking because you're not going to go back 3 years and give students what they didn't get. That's just not going to happen. But what we can do is teach students to go from a content driven mindset to a skill driven mindset. And as looking through this definition again, there's no mention of skills. And that is the number one thing is when I've sat with deans, directors of admissions, first year faculty members when I was in K 12, they mentioned skill, 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 nothing about content. And all of them said to a T, they would wish K 12 would stop force feeding this idea of content because content serves no purpose in a 2 or 4 year school. It's a skill driven world. And even now as an advisor and talking to faculty and deans is that some students are coming from a K-12 system without a foundation. Yes, they've been in college prep, but have they learned the necessary skills that are within college prep to be successful? You can go on to the next slide. So, one of the key issues that I believe is at the center of the intersection of high school and college is the instructional programs are between high school and college. Like I said, it's imprecise because K-12, unless you take out IB, college prep, honors classes, they live in a world by themselves. But students who are in a traditional high school, there's no guarantee that they're getting all the necessary things that they're aligned with higher education. And yes, there are summer bridge programs and things of that nature, but private school kids in some areas cannot go to summer bridge or upward bound or have access to those early college programs. There's no communication. And as I went through this process of as an administrator, talking to my principal, and this was a huge argument of going away from traditional models of learning. You're not going to go back and give students what they didn't get. But if you're truly going to make students college ready, you have to listen to what they want. What are the essential skills that are needed to be successful in a 2 or 4 year program? And over the course of that year, problem solving, critical thinking, analyzing were all of those core skills that all of them were mentioning. And this is what I moved our teachers to, but also moved after finally winning winning the argument with the principal that we were going to move to a skill driven approach. This is so true. I agree. You can go on to the next slide. Solutions from a K-12 perspective. I read a book in my in my master's program called Building Background Knowledge by Robert Maranzano. And he listed a bunch of ideas of how to improve background knowledge. And one of the things that he mentioned, especially with students of color and students from impoverished background, the number one thing you can do to improve a person's background knowledge is academically enriching experiences. And that's the thing that is missing from underserved communities, underserved schools of like, have they been exposed to higher levels of thinking, different text? Have they sat down and talked with one of the things that I did was I had a panel that I brought to one of my high school classes. I brought a dean, a faculty member, an admissions rep, and an instructor from a 2 year school. And they gave the students firsthand knowledge of here's what we look for, here's why people fail. And they got a chance to hear it directly, not secondhand or third hand or things can get lost, is they had access to real people. And when you think about college preparation, not a lot of students of color, students from impoverished background, do they have access to people? Has someone been brought in to really explain to them what is needed just beyond, hey, fill out your financial aid papers, the placement test and whatever else you have to do? Has someone gone through and explained that? And then the other thing that changed our school's perspective and also that changed my outlook as an administrator, as a teacher, and now as a faculty member. I I wrote our first curriculum for our capstone class. I took concepts from IB, college prep, honors classes in college, of where all of our high school seniors were going to go through a capstone class, of where we're going to deal with preparation for the 2 and 4 year school. We're going to do the real world projects of where their final project for the second half of the year was they had to do a group project of where we either looked at poverty, minimum wage, college preparation, and they had to give a presentation in front of a live audience of how they would solve this problem. And one of the things that came from that is their confidence in that this important person just heard how I would solve this problem. Or, man, I didn't know I could think like that. That opened my eyes to just how important it is as a leader. You have to be driven to what I say is living in the now, and leading in the years. You can belabor it should be this where they shouldn't get this. or you can devote your energy as a leader to the is. The confidence they gained from that capstone class was amazing. But also with as all of the other teachers started to go to more of a project based, inquiry based final projects, their engagement increased. They were getting the skills they needed for the workforce, 2 and 4 year schools. It was something that was not only was it new, we weren't belaboring about what they didn't get. We were focused in on the now. And that's one of the things I say to some of my folks in higher education. If you want to understand, if you want to lead them to wherever the ultimate goal is, you got to understand where they've been. In that, for a lot of students, that foundational experience of learning how to critically think, how to problem solve, how to be in a different light. And one of the things that I also did in my capstone course is we read the book Tuesdays with Maury. All of my capstone classes, we read Tuesdays with Maury. And there's 14 Tuesdays between when Mitch met with Maury. And one of the things that I had them do is they taught a master class. I said, you have 14 Tuesdays to teach us about life, your experience, um, something that's a unified idea of where if I didn't know you, you're going to teach me what you think I need to know. And having students go through that experience of asking questions, asking me, their peers, about things they've never thought about, the conversations that came from that. Those are the things that prepare students for that next level. Those are the things as an administrator and as a teacher is what what you're living because you're seeing their growth. You're seeing when students have the opportunity to be exposed to different ideas, to be exposed to different assignments, and to be challenged. I think the biggest miss sometimes is with students is that they don't want to be challenged. I have never met a student that in some form that did not want to be pushed. All students want that little push or that perspective of, man, I never thought of that. Academically enriching experiences, those are the elements that sometimes is missing from the K-12 perspective. And what I try to convey to some of my higher ed colleagues is that they haven't been exposed to, like, I'm an advisor in the social science program. And in one of their psychology courses, and even so, they're asked to think like they're sociologists. They're asked to think like they're psychologists. And I say to some of the instructors and the deans is like, if I'm coming from a place of no one ever taught me how to think or even posed that question to me, well, how do you expect me to answer that? Or that you want me to think this way. But if I don't have that foundational understanding, I'm gonna just treat that question as what I call armchair quarter. You just do it this way. There's no real thought and perspective into that. Um, and that's always the push and pull in the higher ed piece when you're talking about first year success, why students don't succeed. I always point to what was their foundation, whether it was the GED, their high school experience. Did they get the foundational skills needed to be successful? So, kind of, what questions do you have so far? What are some of your thoughts as we're through this slide so far?
Monique here.
Yes.
I really am excited about this topic, Dr. Smith. As a K through 12 educator, specifically secondary ed, I have 200 students, and we work with business education as well as marketing and computer science, similar to Dr. Williams. My question for you is this. I hear you share that students want to be challenged. However, what do you think of the educators' perspective of willing to take academic risks or support their students in critical thinking?
Um, that's a good question. And one of the things that was the push and pull with the teachers, I go back to my undergrad days. I was influenced by Parker Palmer, and he wrote the book Courage to Teach. And he always talks about the soul of a teacher looking inward. And I'm a big believer in I have a college education. I've achieved a lot of success. What kind of teacher would I be if I did not help the next person? And that's what I try to convey to our teachers. And it took a while. I said is, yes, you could teach content. But if you look inward and be the kind of teacher that you would want, that's where you change lives. Because you could be right and teach your content and go the traditional way of learning, or you could be on the side of right and look inward and give that student that perspective of, man, I didn't really know I could do that. And one of the things that I got the biggest pushback for is that in our school, we were a small private school. Our high school was 20, average about 27 students. Our middle school was about 20. I had a college tour of where I brought Auburn, University of Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Duke, the Art Institute of Atlanta, all of these. And oh, you're just doing this for likes, mentions, and clicks, and all this. I said, no, 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 no. The most important thing you can do is expose a student to high levels of things. In the University of Tennessee came, and the lady, she was wheeling her carts in to the auditorium, and two of my students just out of nowhere walked up to her, shook her hand, introduced themselves, and asked for a business card. I could have retired that day. That could have been the last day I ever taught, and I would have been happy. Because if they never go, but for that one moment in time, they had access to somebody. And to see that, you're not supposed to be partial and biased, but to see a young Black boy walk up, make eye contact, firm handshake, ask for that business card, I'm like, man, I could quit. I could retire right now. I could do 100 other things right. But this right here, this is it. Because I always believe in, I quote Parker Palmer, like even now to my graduate students, it's the inward experience that changes lives of students. When you look inside, it's like, what kind of teachers would I want to have? Who were the teachers that influenced me? That's what I preach, I believe in wholeheartedly, is that inward experience of who influenced me to be a teacher? What motivated me? I tell my grad students, and I told my high school students, I said, when we were talking about legacy, I said, the number one thing that I'm going to leave behind is not money, is not awards, books, and all. the number one thing that I'm going to leave behind is the influence that I have on others. That's it. What I did for you all, if you become better people, got a better job, got over something, then I know how much of a success I have been as a teacher. If I influenced you in some way positively, that is it.
Dr. Smith, I have
Yes,
a question.
sure.
So now that we're coming out of the pandemic, and I think I have my years right. So a lot of the students who are going and will be graduating from high school this year, were those the class that were pretty much during the pandemic? And so you hear a lot about the problems that they had. I've read a lot of things that say that those students are at least 2 years behind in their academic careers, as far as what you've been talking about, what they should know, and also what they have been experienced to, for various reasons, the school, the teachers, the whatever. So how do you think that those students are going to fare with their high school readiness to go to college, considering they are probably the first graduating class to come out of the pandemic?
I would say it depends upon really one big thing. What's the university they're choosing? Because we all know that in our own undergrads, like we didn't have a choice but to take all foundational courses. When I was an undergrad, you could not exempt any of them. I took intro to critical thinking. I took intro to communications. Um, that led me to the upper division general education classes I had and things within my major. I chose a university that was structured that way. Are they going to choose a university that's research based, of where there's no foundational courses and they're jumping into straight into English 1100, math 1100? Is what's the type of institution they're going to choose? It's probably the biggest thing. And how is their general education courses structured?
Yeah. Well, with that being said, because they were, for the most part, not going into a brick and mortar, into a real school where they could actually go in there and talk to a counselor to talk about those things, I think that they are not going to be able to answer those questions. I have a lot of nieces and nephews. I don't think that they're going to be able to answer those questions. And then the other thing that you mentioned, now that I'm thinking about them, and one is actually going to graduate in May. We got a invitation today, May the 23rd of 2025. I have not heard them talk about high school to college readiness, and I think that, and then they go to a pretty good school district. I have not even heard that being taught. Lately, I mean, since I graduated, of having real counselors where you can go. And so I'm struggling with been trying to help myself to see what I could do to help them. And like I said, I also teach undergraduates as well, and they're not prepared, and they weren't even part of the pandemic. So there's a whole problem of the not just picking the university, but once they pick the university, they go through the 4 years, coming out into the real world, the workforce, because I do a lot of workforce development, and it's things that they don't have as an adult, which means that they didn't get it before they got to me, and they didn't have the obstacles that I think the students are having now. So I don't know if they even know how to do what you're saying, or if anybody else knows how to do what you're saying in order to prepare them. They're just going to probably apply to a bunch of universities, and whichever one accepts them is going to be it. They're not going to do any research, and especially the ones that are in your area and various areas. Let me just say various areas across the country, because it's not just, you know, Hurricane Helene and Milton. There's other
Mm.
things too. They are not going to have time to be doing that. You don't have power, so I'm pretty sure you're not going to be looking for a college or a university. What can we as adults, as I'm just an aunt, what can we as an aunt or an uncle or somebody do to help them to bridge what they have not gotten in 4 years?
Um, is within the school, is there, I always tell students, is there a wall of information that sometimes that that you get overlooked, of where most public school kids have access to either a bridge program, or there's a summer sort of academic enrichment program at some universities. A lot of universities will have those. Encourage, encourage parents to look at those, because oftentimes that sometimes is another opportunity, not just for the college scholarships, but that growth of being exposed to living on a college campus, taking some college courses. Are there opportunities that some universities have? And then the other thing that I would encourage administrators to do in K-12 is, when I brought folks in from other colleges, the three things I asked of them. I said, please just do not hand out some pencils and some cards. Don't do that. Please do not do that. Second is, share the information that you would want your son or daughter or your niece or nephew to have. Third is, go in there knowing that is, if you say one thing that can spark someone's interest, is you could change a life. Because when you look at underserved populations, I'm a big believer in is that they've been exposed to, well, you can't, well, no one's coming, no one doesn't believe. What if there is that one person that can show a video, provide a brochure, that mini interaction could change a life? There's a video, I don't know if it's still on social media. Um, and why am I drawing a blank on his name? He passed away, the actor from Black Panther. He talks about Denzel Washington paying for a camp, and how if he did not go to that camp, he would have never became an actor. Is that sometimes providing an opportunity for an explanation, a brochure, that's how we change lives in education in underserved population. So I'm going to ask. And if you tell me no, I'm going to find somebody that's tell me yes. You could tell me no 1,000, I'm coming for a yes. And when I got the University of Alabama to come, he told me no 100 times. But when I asked him, I said, okay, how about this? If you bring just one admission rep and you talk about the brand of the University of Alabama and some of the mission trips that students have gone on and how that has influenced them, think about the legacy that you're leaving behind, that you got one to come to University of Alabama. And he said, you know what? Okay, I'll do it. You have to be, like I said, be a pusher when it comes to fighting for students. Is you're going to tell me no about, but I'm going to get a yes somewhere in there, because I'm going to agitate the mess out of you till I get the one yes. And I don't care how small the yes is, but you're going to give me that yes. But at the end of it, I'm always going to say thank you. Um, because like I just go back to Parker Palmer and being the kind of teacher and being the kind of the leader that fought for their students. Being the kind of person that saw the bigger picture of that these interactions can change lives, moments, and families. You can go on to the next slide. So, the foundational college skills, these are the three things now I talk about as an academic advisor. Learning how to read a college textbook, I always would tell my high school students is that it's when you go to a 2 or 4 year school, you're not reading to learn when you go to college with whatever it is you're reading. You're learning how to read because we all know that in undergrad, some of those college textbooks are way different than a high school textbook. There's so many implied things you have to pull out that you, the reader, have to figure out what's important, as opposed to in high school, everything is spelled out for you. You in college have to do that. And when I'm advising students, especially in the social sciences, because some of the textbooks you have to have the skills to pull out the implied things, is that change your mindset that it's going to take some time for you to get comfortable learning how to read some of the college textbooks because they're all going to be different. Second is the writing. Is that I always say in high school, you're going from sort of an opinion based sort of type, well, what's your perspective on this in high school? Of where it's sort of that armchair thinking of where there's no foundation. And in college, you're matching the research with the human experience and connecting the two. In K-12, if you went to a very good high school or you were in IB honors, you got that experience. But if you didn't get that experience, that's where some of the issues are when you talk about those first year college, because students miss that connection between research and the human experience. And lastly, I always talk about the mindset of transitioning from a content driven approach to now you're in a skills based world of where you're going to be asked to analyze, critically think, problem solve, as opposed to read and take the test. And I tell students, I said, maybe outside of your math course and maybe a science course, 98% of the classes you take in college, it's going to be a skill driven thing. Your classes in college are not going to give you multiple choice tests. Very few. Very few. And when working with students, and I encourage a lot of, especially my students of color, and there's a book by Lewis Newman about critical thinking. And he talks about going from this learning how to have a mindset about discipline thinking. What is it like to think from the humanities perspective? What is it like to think from a social science perspective? What are those key questions? And those are the things that I find as an advisor, a lot of my students thank me for because they went out and bought the book and they say, okay, this is what I'm missing. This is what I wish someone had explained to me. Because again, going back to the K-12 world, is that those foundational things are what's missing. And when they get into college, I tell my high school students, you get in college, what you didn't get, no one really cares about. I said, walk up to a professor and talk about what you didn't get. You're going to get your feelings hurt. You're going to get some very ugly words. And I always tell them the story of I took intermediate to expository writing. And the very first day of class, a young lady raised her hand and said, Professor Little, yes. Well, sir, I didn't get this when I was in high school. He took off his glasses, walked around the podium, and he said, well, I'm going to just tell you like this way. I don't give a blip, blip, blip what you didn't get in your blip and blip in high school. She never came back. And everybody else was silent. You could not hear a pin drop. And what I told my high school class is that when you're in that adult world, the last thing they want to hear is an excuse. Some people may listen to you and just be like, oh, that's good. But you may have that one professor who's going to be raw and uncut, and it's going to come out harsh, but it's going to be the truth of where what you didn't get is not a concern of theirs. And I said, some may be really, really nice. Some are going to be really, really harsh. And Dad Little, he was harsh. He was going to tell you straight up how it is, what it is, and if it hurt you, what you didn't, is just what it is. It's those type of conversations, whether it's K-12, higher education, is that we assume sometimes too much as educators that students, like I go back to all every should, is that somewhere in their K-12 and someone's going to tell them XYZ. Or we're going to say someone should have, where all students should, every student should, and it's like, well, wait a minute. Why are we living in this world of where, why don't we just tell them? Instead of assuming someone down the line is going to tell them this or they're going to figure it out, is just tell them. So that's kind of, the world that I have lived in, is that the biggest thing is be genuine, be honest, and be the kind of leader that you would want your son, daughter, granddaughter, grandson to have. Because oftentimes, especially with underserved populations, we don't have the fighter. We don't have someone, like I said, I'll take 100 no's, but I'm going to get a yes. I'm going to be the person to bug you to no end till you give me a yes. And that's what it takes to lead in this new age of education. To be a pusher, to be an innovator, but also going back to some of the things that Parker Palmer talks about. Your inward journey as a teacher begins with why you wanted to do this. Do you just want to teach content, or do you want to have impact? And
So,
go ahead.
Dr. Smith, not to rush you or anything, and I know this has been great conversation, and actually kind of happy that we had a small group that we were able
Mhm.
to get our questions in. I think you have about two more slides, and one
Okay.
of questions and final thoughts, which I think we are going through right now. I just wanted to know if you wanted to go on to those slides or
We can
what.
go on to, I'll just run through those really quick and we can get to questions.
Okay.
Um, just in general education, this is what's missing from the K-12, is higher education is sort of pretty much built around these things. If you are a parent, a grandparent, or a teacher, asking these questions about, a high school science class or a high school history class, are some of these things embedded? Or if you are a teacher, can you embed some of these things in your courses? Though that would be the only thing I would see about that. And you can go on to the next slide. Questions. I'll take in any questions you have.
Monique here, as I've been monitoring the chat, no questions, but a lot of kudos. I'll go ahead and defer to Dr. Williams if she'd choose to share some of the comments.
Okay, let me just, so Dr. Smith, is it okay for me to stop sharing right now so I can
Yes.
chat? Okay.
Yes.
Well, first of all, Dr. Smith, we want to thank you for a very informative presentation. Let's start with that before we even get to the questions. Um, I don't think that I've ever heard anyone talk about the gap and explain the gap and what's in the minds of teachers like yourself. I mean, I know that I talk to them, but usually not at this level of detail and things like that. They basically talk about the content, what they teach at
Mm,
their various schools and things like that. So I've never had this type of a open dialogue talking about what they should be doing versus what they are doing. So again, thank you very much for that. Excuse me, for those of you who can see in the chat, Dr. Smith has been gracious enough to include both of his email addresses in the chat, his Gmail as well as his Southern New Hampshire University email address as well. Some of the comments that were made for you, Dr. Smith, is today's workshop is inspirational. For those of us who are teachers and are ed leaders, I'm grateful to BDN for hosting and for Dr. Smith for his advocacy. So again, some very positive comments. Today's workshop by Dr. Derek Smith was quite enriching. I plan to share this workshop with my Title One students, the Greater Chicago Land. Thanks you, sir. Um,
if I could just say one more thing,
yeah.
it is that I share this. I started this with my GED students, and I went on to share this with when I became an administrator. Is if any of you have seen the movie Men of Honor, I made my GED students watch the 12-step scene. And what I did with them is I said is when Cuba Gooding Jr. got to step 7 and he was about to fall, I said, think about all of the naysayers you have had that are waiting for that leg to give out. And what that would mean if that leg gives out. When he got to step 12 and Robert De Niro turned around to that captain and just sort of looked at him like, now what? Imagine that feeling of like, you shut everybody up. If the way Robert De Niro looked at him, that's a life changing thing to say you've accomplished something. And what I did with my teachers is I say, you got 12 steps between your undergrad and when you start teaching. You learn all this content stuff. But when you get to step 7 and you're fighting back and forth between, man, there's content I really want to impact. But when you get to step 12, and whether it's 1 year, 5 years, or 20 years later, and that student hugs you, and there's all those tears and all these other things, ask yourself one question. Would you trade that moment for anything? And I said, for those people who watched Carl make that 12-step scene in that movie, when Robert De Niro looked at that man, and the audience looked at that man, like he made it. You as a teacher, when that when your student hugs you or they introduce you to your family, are you going to give that moment back to cross that bridge to see how they look at you or when they introduce you to their children of what you did for them? I always say that's the kind of teacher and the kind of person I want to be. And I said, this is what you should aim for, is to be the kind of person that you impacted a life. You didn't get anything from it, but the fact of that they can come back and say thank you. Would you trade that moment?
Thank you,
Mm.
Dr. Smith. So I have dropped the evaluation link in the chat. Could someone please, other than myself, could someone else please make sure they have access to it? Maybe Dr. Deetra German. because I'm pretty sure myself and Monique can get to it. And
It takes me to a registration page.
oh, okay. Okay, let me go back in. I think it says here are the evaluation and Zoom links for each workshop. Okay, let me get the because I had it open and then I may have closed it. The window closed. Okay, I think I got it. Okay, ma'am, Dr. German, could you see if that one works? I think I had something on my clipboard from before.
No, it doesn't open anything. I think that's
Okay,
the meeting URL.
okay. I have a big screen TV for a reason so that I can have 50 windows open. I think I think I have 50 feet clipboard. Okay, the third time should be a charm. Is that it, Dr. German?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, sorry about that. So that's to let you all know that I was busy out there beforehand talking to Dr. Smith, making sure that I had the Zoom link right so he could get in. So the evaluation is in the chat now. Along with the Zoom link, along with the Zoom link too, if anybody wanted to come in on the tail end, as well as the plug for the event for the conference later this week. So you got some of everything out there that you could click on. And so while we're having some time filling out the evaluation form, I just wanted to acknowledge Dr. Monique Bury Ballard, who's on serving as my co-facilitator. Thank her for that. Also, thank everyone else who was in attendance. I think a couple people have dropped off. But while we have people filling out the evaluation, Dr. Ballard, if you could just quickly tell us what you're going to be talking about on next week, and then we will go on and close out.
Sure thing. Thank you, Dr. Williams, for that. And Dr. Smith, you are going to be a hard act to follow. Outstanding presentation today, sir. Thank you so much for that knowledge.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's
So,
Dr. Go
so
ahead.
Dr. Ballard, could you just quickly tell us, give us a teaser as to what you're going to be talking about next week on becoming?
No problem. As Dr. Williams shared earlier, I often find a disconnect between what we look like on paper as academics versus what we actually do. And I anticipate that our shareholder or stakeholders next week will have hands-on experiences thinking outside of the box, coming up and generating ideas of how they have illuminated the paths of education from past to today and showcasing our our strengths, gifts, and talents so that we can also have a seat at the table. I look forward to seeing each and every one of you there next week with me this time.
Okay, all right, thank you. So this presentation is being recorded and it's going to be available on the BDN website. And again, thank you, Dr. Smith, and thank you all of the attendees. Looking forward to being here with you on next week, and I will also be the facilitator for Dr. Ballard. And yeah, just looking forward to seeing you next week. And I know it's going to be as exciting as it was this week. Dr. Smith, were you going to say something?
No, again, thank you all. Thank you all. Like I said, just email me if there's ever you have any questions. And so I had a lot of fun today.
Oh, okay. We're glad you had we're glad you had fun. So again, thank everyone and have a great rest of your day.